Dirk Eldredge joins us from Momenta Recovery, where they offer trauma-specific care for women. He talks about getting past low self-esteem and a high sense of failure in order to find his true calling in life. He had a successful career during his 20-year functioning addict bender, but realized he was chasing the wrong goals. He became a successful interventionist, helped the Super Bowl winning Seattle Seahawks as a life coach, and has found home with his bride in the Roaring Fork Valley in Colorado, where they focus together on helping women with trauma. Enjoy. Welcome to the Illuminate Recovery podcast. We shed light on mental health issues, mental illness, and addiction recovery, ways to cope, manage, and inspire. Beyond the self-care we will discuss, you may need the help of a licensed professional. My name's Kurt Nider. I'm a husband, a father, entrepreneur, a handyman, and a student of life. I avoid conflict, I deflect with humor, and I'm fascinated by the human experience.
And I'm Shelley Mangum. I am a clinical mental health counselor, and my favorite role of all times is grandma. I am a seeker of truth, and I feel like life should be approached with tremendous curiosity.
I ask the dumb questions.
I fill in the gaps.
The Illuminate Recovery podcast is brought to you by Illuminate Billing Advocates. Make billing and collection simple with leader in substance abuse and mental health billing services. Verification and analysis of benefits, pre-authorizations, utilization management, accurate claim submission and management, denial and appeal management, and industry-leading reporting. Improve your practice's cash flow and your ability to help your clients with Illuminate Billing Advocates.
Today, we are super excited to have Dirk Eldredge with us. Dirk is the CEO of Momenta Recovery in Colorado. Momenta Recovery is an inpatient residential healing center for women only. The primary clinical focus is attachment, trauma, and co-occurring disorders. Momenta believes in always leading with love, community, and the most robust clinical offering available anywhere. The client's safety is primary. The gender-specific approach to restoration and recovery allows clients to immediately feel loved and understood rather than condemned and judged. Surrendering to a new way of thinking and rewriting the narrative you have told yourself for years are two key approaches to newfound freedom and meaning in life. This is what is being done at Momenta, and Dirk, we are super excited for you to be with us today.
Thanks, Shelley. Thanks, Kurt.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. Excited to be here.
Hey, Dirk, maybe just take a few minutes to give us some history. How did you end up in the recovery industry, and kind of some of your background and where you come from?
Okay, I'll give you the Reader's Digest of my 60 fun-filled years on this earth. My folks were married for 63 years. Lost my father a couple years ago to dementia, and mom is on her way out now, but they enjoyed a great marriage. They were 18 and 20, and then I got a sister who's 2 years older than me. I call her still to this day my perfect sister Kim, because we grew up under the same roof and life laid down in a beautiful way for her. And I had all those same advantages. And when I went to USC and played ball and graduated, I started on a 20-year bender, basically what I think those of us in recovery would define as a high-functioning addict, alcoholic, where I thought the recipe for success in life was money, and just to make as much money as I could would take care of all my ills and all my fears, and that's what I did. And never missed a day of work. Started off at IBM out of college, and then figured out I was never going to make the kind of money I wanted to make, so I switched to commercial printing because my girlfriend's dad owned the best printing company in the country at the time, and in LA, and there were a couple of open bars and some apartments and a 24-hour day, 7 day a week work week, and it was a perfect place for me to reside as a budding alcoholic and addict because it was all about just taking care of the entertainment industry in LA as well as the automobile industry. And yeah, I just went into a 20-year progression, as we know, from this disease. And I won't bore you with the story behind it because we've heard the story 1,000 times. But the bottom line for me was that as long as I was drunk or high or both, I could deal with my low self-esteem and my high fear of failure by just staying numb and doing what I thought I was supposed to do, and that was make money. And, you know, towards the end of that, I was fooling almost everybody, except for myself, of course, and God. But I was gifted with my body breaking down in my late 30s. I kept going to the ER, throwing up, and not being able to stop. And I look back on it now after nearly 20 years of recovery and realize I was gifted with, you know, an esophagus that was stopping its functioning and my kidney and liver shutting down. And I was, you know, I went to treatment one day. I called this guy, Pierre. He was in town drunk in Palos Verdes where I grew up. And he had been sober for a couple of decades at that time. Talked to him in the parking lot of San Pedro Recovery Center, and he convinced me to check in. So I went to treatment for 30 days, sat in the front row, did everything that was asked of me, and decided on the 31st day that I was mindfully and bodily different than everybody else there. I was smarter, and then I could manage this thing. So I went back out for a couple more years and did some more research, as we say, and then again was gifted with a few runs to the ER. And this time my 4 or 5 best friends showed up at the end of my bed and said, "We're on to you, and we're not going to be a part of your life unless you get help, because we're not going to watch you die." And that time I went to Creative Care up in Malibu and checked myself in and stayed for 90 days of a 30-day program. And when I left there, I knew while I was there that this recovery thing was the only thing in my life that ever made any sense. And I heard things in the rooms, I heard things in group rooms and individual therapeutic opportunities. And when I left Creative Care, I drove to my printing company, which I owned part of at the time, and we had a couple hundred employees on the shop floor. And I said, "I'm a drug addict and an alcoholic, and you'll never see me again." And I packed up my office, got in my car, and drove to LMU, and went back to college in my late 30s because, you know, studying the disease of addiction was not just interesting to me, it was the most compelling thing I'd ever really addressed in my life. And, you know, as they say, I changed everything. My wife left me while I was in treatment that second time because she didn't think I'd ever stay sober. And I went back to college, and I had this amazing therapist, Dr. Randy Gunther, who had been with me through all of this, and she suggested that I become an interventionist. And I didn't know what the hell that was at the time, but a gentleman by the name of Ed Storty, who, in my opinion, wrote the book on intervention, and he happened to be, you know, he's living in San Pedro, which was about 5 minutes from where I was sitting. So I pursued Ed, and he taught me, ultimately, I won't bore you with the details, but he's a very busy man, and I had to strong arm him into getting his attention. And we're still dear friends to this day, but Ed taught me everything he knew about intervention, and I took off on a 10-year, maybe 12-year odyssey into family interventions, went as far away as Bangladesh, did hundreds and hundreds of interventions, and loved the process, and still do. I see it as a craft and an art that is super important. But through that, I ended up in the NFL. I Pete Carroll, when he was the head coach at USC, gave me a job as the life coach for the USC Trojan football team. And then the year after that, he decided to go up to Seattle, and I went with him along with Kenny Norton and Rocky and a few other coaches, and we built, or Pete rebuilt Seattle Seahawks football into a Super Bowl winner, and we got to do that. And again, at the end of that game, I was crying and thinking, how the hell did I end up here? And it's just, none of it's lost on me that in recovery, things that are unimaginable become very imaginable and very tangible if we just show up as the best version of our authentic self. And from there, I'm blessed now and been married now for 15 years to Stacy Lee, and I missed her, so I got out of football and got out of the airplanes, really, and went up to Jaywalker Lodge in Carbondale. Bobby Ferguson created a beautiful thing up there for men, and I was privileged to be able to run his company for 4 or 5 years, and fell in love with Colorado. And Momenta was born out of another family that I worked with, Dan Johnson, who is a great man and a solid citizen in Northern California, where he's in the affordable housing business and assisted living, and he's I would call him like a serial entrepreneur, and he got interested in mental health through my helping him and his family with his son probably a decade ago, and he started Momenta here in the valley, the Roaring Fork Valley, and asked me if I'd run it. And I was looking for a new challenge. Women's trauma treatment specifically is, I'll just say, it's a hell of a lot more interesting than helping men. I find it to be more challenging, more clinically robust, and just an amazing opportunity to create a safe place for women to heal in a 90-day program as a minimum. And Stacy Lee and I show up here every day because it's our passion. It's not a job. And we have been in business now for 3 years, and every day is an adventure. So that's a pretty long-winded answer to your question, but it's kind of a aerial view of my time in recovery.
Well, I can tell why you just have to give us an aerial view, because that's a pretty dynamic story, and it sounds like you've done a lot of incredible things and had some incredible opportunities, like you said. So I love the wisdom that you bring to this conversation and kind of the experience that you have, because not everybody gets those opportunities.
No, it's I tell the ladies every morning, like, recovery is a promise of your future, not a consequence of your past. And I really believe that. A lot of times when you sit in the rooms, you hear these old people like me talk about being a grateful alcoholic or a grateful addict. And it sounds like a load of bullshit, and it's not. It's an absolute gift, and I do see it, is something that if I hadn't gone through it, I would never have hit the pause button or been gifted with grace and life to really understand the essence of the fact that life is an inside job. It's like I thought everything and all my freedoms and my goals were outside of myself. And what recovery has taught me and still teaches me every day, and that is that it's an inside job.
Yeah, and that's the truth. But I think we chase it so long that we don't even know it's within us, right? And we're just chasing it all every day.
Yep.
So it's a powerful journey of turning inward and figuring out what's going on inside. I love that. I can tell by the way you share your story that you've done your work and that you're in a really good place when you talk about being grateful that your body started to break down and send you to the ER, right? It's like, who's grateful for that? But you're grateful because of the journey that put you on, because otherwise you may not have chosen recovery.
No, I'm quite sure you're right, Shelley. I would tell you unequivocally, I would have taken it to to death. I was well on my way, and I really had no clue what was in front of me when I surrendered the second time, and hopefully the final time, to this progressive brain disease that I happen to have. And I do believe that, I've one of the frustrations, and I know the two of you and anybody else in recovery knows that we lose so many people to this disease, and why I was extended grace and an opportunity to heal multiple times, as opposed to so many of my friends that we've lost, is a mystery to me. I don't know why, and I'm sure I'll never know exactly why, but I was gifted with like a slow roll breakdown of my physical body, which brought me to my knees, and then I was able to surrender. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I was at the front door of Creative Care with my board shorts and flip-flops on, and my 5 best friends off my shoulder, and this really pretty therapist named Dominique answered the door, and she said, "Who are you?" And I said, "My name is Dirk, and I don't know how to do life. Can you teach me how to do life?" And from that moment to this moment, I have not been compelled to use drugs or alcohol, and I've been gifted with this awareness in the unknowing. Like that same low self-esteem and high fear of failure, which paralyzed me for 20 years, is now the same thing that frees me. And I have never been so certain that I don't know shit and that it's absolutely okay. And it's like it's just the story we make up in our head, and the thought. And I remember as a teenager and a young adult, and that was that I thought everybody else in the world had all the answers except for me, and that I was isolated and alone in this scary world, and the only thing that got me by was to get numb, because the sensitivity to it and the overwhelming nature of it was just all consuming. And so the same things that captured me for a couple of decades of addiction are the same things that have freed me to just show up as the best version of my authentic self and have that be fine.
Well, and I think it's interesting because it's sometimes our gold, or those positive characteristics that we have that drive us in the wrong direction, right? As we're just focusing our attention in the wrong spaces, the wrong direction. And when we can turn that around and like you said, see that it comes from inside and not outside, then it's those very things that create a powerful life and a healthy life.
Yeah. Amen.
You work with women, and women's trauma, like you said, is maybe a whole lot more fulfilling than working with men, which I'm not sure I understand that dynamic as much, but I do love working with women. That's actually my passion, is women in trauma, and there is something about their intensity. But I also imagine that with many women, their trauma is men. And here you come in as a CEO, and you're talking to these women about their trauma. What's that dynamic look like?
That's a great question, Shelley, and it's absolutely true. And I think, again, an unimaginable path, but one that makes perfect sense. And to answer your question, is to show up as a man and as a loving husband at the same time, because my wife is a very gifted therapist, and is one of the best psychotherapists I've ever known. And we show up in this space together. So I not only get to model what a safe man can look like, but also a loving husband. And for many of these women, it's the first time in their lives they've ever been around a man that is safe. And it's an unbelievably important dynamic. And also, just again, on the scope of growth, I happen to be fully and immensely in love with my bride, and it's an opportunity that in some ways is symbiotic of the fact that, in prior to recovery, I didn't have any healthy relationships with women. And it was very, kind of typical, inclusive of the very poor design of my parents' marriage, which I referred to earlier, where, it's a generational piece where my mother was basically a servant to my father, and that was what I thought was normal and healthy, because they were married for 62 years. But the fact of the matter is, it was incredibly unhealthy, and the minimization, marginalization of women has become, a flag that I get to carry, and not just to empower women, but to surround myself with women that are trying to find their voice and trying to find their foundation. And if I get to spend a little bit of time with them every day, because I am very much a boots on the ground CEO, I know everything about all the women we're trying to help and how I might best be a non-clinical puzzle piece for their healing. And it really just resides in healthy boundaries and leaning into the art of listening and just meeting people where they are. Because I do think that is the essence of so much of our pain, and that is that so many of these women, including and not exclusive to the Orthodox Jewish community, which is, I bring it up only because the oppressive nature of it all is coming through in living color as I continue to manifest and grow Momenta. It's just something as simple as sitting and listening to somebody is a huge privilege and a gift, and I think a grounding space for creating safety. And being patient with it. Nothing, I think, happens that's going to shift your perspective or become a part of your constitution in 30 days. And I don't think it's going to happen in 90 days either. But I do believe that a foundation can be built in a safe place that leads with love, to connect and to hear, and rather than to condemn and judge. If I can just create, as we have here at Momenta, that space for these women, then that creates purposefulness, and it creates a space where I think not only will we be around for a long time, we'll help one family at a time in a very intimate way. Let these ladies not only understand their voice, but to find their passion. And I do believe that that's the key to the kingdom, for each of us as humans, male or female.
Well, and it's incredible. What you talk about is so true, is because you're right. They're not gonna change their life in 30 days, but they're gonna start that process. And I think the only way that someone can really feel safe enough to really dive in and look at those incorrect messages that have been sent to them for decades, for a lifetime sometimes, is to have a safe place where somebody else is talking about it and gives them permission to open their mouth and go, wait, that happened to me too. But it has to be a safe place or they just won't do it, right? And so creating that safe place allows them to do so much healing and start that process like you talked about. So that's super powerful. I'm imagining that some of these women are pretty triggered by you. Can you think of some of the interactions that you've had with them? I mean, I think back to working with women and some of the horrific things that they had been through, and even being in the room with a man was almost more than they could tolerate at times. Have you experienced that?
Absolutely. And, it's, again, patience and safety, and the fact that you're absolutely correct, Shelley, and it's a brand new opportunity for many of these women. And, to be real with you, I mean, some of these ladies end up looking at me, and we enter into relationships where I'm showing up more like a father than anything else. Just an encouragement piece, a place that if I can model healthy listening and behaviors around these women, the doors and the walls begin to fall and open. And I know my role and I stay in my lane, and we're gifted with a really profoundly unique and powerful clinical team. And it's notable to say that clinical team is led primarily by another male, and every therapist we have is a female, and every employee we have is a female, other than Dennis and I. And it's a really rich and important role for each of us, and that is to lower expectations and show up in space and really not worry so much about what comes out of our mouth as much as we're showing up and modeling what a safe male can look like. And because I'm as old as the hills now, I guess I take on the role of dad, because many of these women had never had a dad, or they had a dad that was profoundly abusive. So it ties into the purposefulness of what we touched on earlier, and that is to stay in my lane, understand that I'm not a clinician. Dennis happens to be a really gifted clinician and works with families as well as anybody I've seen, but my role is just to hold space and to show, what an unconditional piece of love can look like with, a servant heart and no agenda.
That's powerful, Dirk. I appreciate you kind of sharing and talking through that, because, we can talk through it all day long, but seeing it happen is the miracle, and seeing women shift. How do you guys address, at Momenta, how do you address the challenge of sending someone back into an environment that wasn't very supportive to begin with?
Well, great question. And, we don't. We do great work around family, and with women it's different, and then oftentimes it means a divorce, or it means a connection with the family of origin, with her family of origin, that is inclusive of coming out here and working with their loved one on what life's going to look like moving forward. To do a lot of therapy while they're here in the second and third month around that systemic family, to either understand that going back is not an option, or to go back with a set of very different boundaries and expectations from everybody involved. But the short answer is nobody's going anywhere without a plan, and a very specific plan that needs to be executed and maintained and manifested over time, because nobody comes in here or any treatment center on a winning streak. And to send them back, as you're suggesting, Shelley, into an unhealthy environment would be not just irresponsible. It's not going to happen. And that's why, we understand we've got a disease of isolation, and the antidote is community. And so many of these ladies are staying back here, most all of them that don't have children. And that's really the gravitational pull that only a mother can understand. And we're working with these ladies while they're here, and we're working with them every week that they're gone. One of the reasons Momenta is small, intentionally small, is because of this equation that you just suggested. And that is to understand that long after they stop cutting you checks for inpatient residential care, that we're touching these people every week. I spend a good part of every day talking to our alumni and asking them that very question. What's it looking like? How's it going? Sometimes it goes great, sometimes it doesn't, and I want to be that provider, that person that shows up at your front door after you're done with our program and after you're done writing checks and says, saying, let's do this. Let's jump in the truck and go back to community that is there for you and loves you, and immerse yourself in it, because this is clearly not working. Because there are those cases. I had one just this weekend with an amazing woman that left us a couple of weeks ago to go back home where there was no community other than her youngest daughter, and it didn't pan out the way she wanted it to, so she's coming back, and not to check into Momenta, but to engage in this community that she developed here in the Roaring Fork Valley while she was here, which made sense to her and worked for her. And that is kind of the essence of what we're talking about, and that is we got to do this together.
Well, and it's an interesting, kind of parallel to your journey as well of, you were smarter and better than everybody else your first time through, and you were going to, be able to go out and manage that much better than you did before. And sometimes we have to go back and try it out and remember how bad it was, because we forget, right?
Yeah. Attempts to control.
Yeah. I remember working with a woman who was in a women's shelter, and she had 2 kids, and she would just tell me of these horrific things that would happen to her in her relationship. And I mean, scary, life-threatening kinds of things. And after months of treatment and therapy and working with her and creating a safe community, she went back. And it just broke my heart. I'm like, no, how can you do that, right? It seems so hard to wrap our heads around. But sometimes they have to, that's the journey, and that's not the end. That's really, just part of the journey sometimes.
Absolutely.
It seems like there's a lot of elements to that, right? Because there's the emotional element of like, why would you ever go back? Just like, this seems like obvious, move on. But at the end of the day, there can be children, there's family relationships, there's the survival, right? We need a place to live and food to eat and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure there's other criteria that, drive these individuals towards what looks like a bad decision because they've got to survive. Mm-hmm. So in order to leave that, they obviously need to figure out all of the logistics of how to live without that. So what does that community look like? When you mention they come back, there's obviously those other elements, right? It's now they're not writing checks. Now they're not, inpatient, that kind of thing. Are you kind of building, this bigger system, right, within that community where, a lot of the people that we talk to have an alumni community, right, where people are connected and they're staying in touch and all that kind of thing. But for a lot of these individuals, it seems like there would be kind of a bigger need than that, right? There's a housing need and all those other things. Do you help them figure out ways to get engaged with employment and that kind of thing? Or what does that community look like really long term?
Well, that's a great question, Kurt. And I got to credit Bobby Ferguson, the founder of Jaywalker, because he figured out long ago that, this Roaring Fork Valley, the Aspen Valley, is kind of what he calls and what I call a sticky zip code. Meaning, if you grow up in New York or Dallas or LA and you come to a place like this, it's pretty attractive. Not to everybody, but to most people, because life slows down a little bit. And, the valley is gifted with a lot of employment opportunity. It's a very robust recovery community. The valley spans, 20 miles from Aspen to Glenwood, and it's kind of a magical place to wake up. There's a small college here, and there's huge levels of tourism, up in Aspen, obviously, during the winter, and in Glenwood in the summer, with all kinds of, everything in Colorado happens outdoors. And the fact of the matter is it's kind of galvanizing because it's attractive to so many people. They don't want to leave. And so many of these young ladies and elderly ladies find safety and comfort in the smallness of this valley. And again, because of recovery and the communities that come with it, and the level of depth and the relationships that they garner while they're here, they may be, and in often cases are, the first healthy, authentic relationships that they've ever had. So the attraction to do this together it's just magnified. Like LA, where I was born and raised, has an incredible recovery community, but it's obviously spread out amongst tens of millions of people. And here it's just more intimate and seemingly more tangible and more attractive because it seems more manageable because of its size. But we do practical things like sober living. We have that as a part of our offer. Another thing, to spare you the sales pitch with Momenta, but to indicate that your primary therapist here at Momenta will continue with you as a therapist, as a safe and understood relationship for as long as you want. And so we're offering an incredible outpatient program run by an amazing woman named Jillian. And it's the pandemic has shifted it to Zoom, and it's now getting more normalized with in-person meetings. But it's really about just a decision to leverage authentic and really intimate relationships that can only be found in a trauma center such as this, and obviously many others across the country, and then to leverage that into day-to-day existence with a small town where people know each other and people support each other in I think a more intimate way because of the size again.
We're okay with the sales pitch. That's part of what we want to hear, because it's the tip of the spear a little bit, right? The way the sales pitch is essentially what you're doing to differentiate yourself, in the market, but that also ends up being the ways that you really can serve people. So we're not afraid of the sales pitch around here. We like to hear it. This is kind of a curiosity of mine, and maybe it's selfish to even go in this direction, but this feels, the Momenta crowd feels so much different, like a 180 from the Seattle Seahawks crowd, right? The professional football player crowd. What was your role like, there and at USC? You call it being a life coach, but I would anticipate that there are kind of more specific elements of that, when you take somebody like Pete Carroll who's looking at putting together a winning team. What's that short-term role look like when dealing with those, team players? And what's the kind of long-term role that you try to mix in there, with the day-to-day activities? What did that role look like for you?
Well, Pete deserves credit for all of it, because he hired me originally to do an intervention on a coach and then on a player. And Pete, if you know him and study the game of coaching, really is an amazing human being and is incredibly authentic. And he is an outside the box thinker. So he saw this guy, Dirk, in the mental health industry serving as his interventionist. And he came up with the idea. I remember I went into his office one day at SC, and he said, I want to hire you to, and he used the word life coach. I don't know where he found it, but that's the word he came up with. And he said, I want you to get out in front of some of these train wrecks and see if you can stop them. And from that discussion was born, not so, in college it's different, Kurt. In college, the coach can say, hey, Kurt, you're going to meet with Dirk 2 hours a week, every week for the rest of the year. And Kurt's response is going to be, yes, sir. Yeah. And when you go to Seattle and any other of the 32 teams and tell the player that, he can give you whatever vernacular for an answer that he wants because he doesn't have to do anything. So it's shifted, and it's not unlike Momenta in the sense that, you're dealing with oversized, super fast, just high performance athletes that at the end of the day are just like the three of us. They're just broken, scared individuals trying to find their way. And I needed to establish rapport and safety and the fact that they're really only worried about their next contract. And they have oftentimes come from broken homes with, the absence of a father, for example, is more than typical. And the fact that they've never been told no because they are special, kind of freakishly great athletes, and that doesn't bode well either. And then you put a little bit of cash in their pocket and it's off to the races. So my job was, first of all, to let them know, with Pete's help and other coaches' help, that I was not a snitch and that I wasn't there to report back to anybody, but I was kind of a boots on the ground counselor to help them navigate life. A lot of it was, I'm married and I got my girlfriend pregnant, or I just ran into a tree off the road. So some of it was, rescuing people in crisis, and kind of getting them grounded in the best, most healthy way to address said crisis, and to manage that with them and to show up for them without an agenda. Everybody understands, or at least thinks that, professional athletes have all this money and all these resources, and the fact of the matter is they don't. They're broken and scared just like the rest of us. And my job was just to get them grounded in a place where they were playing football, in this case, without distraction and without fear. And that was just an immense gift that Pete gave me. And he has subsequently found somebody far smarter than me named Dr. Michael Gervais, who is an amazing soul as well. And he's taken the ball and run with it and works very closely with Pete in just what we're talking about, and that is being present for each moment and playing without fear. It was a very different day-to-day existence, traveling with the team and being with the team. You're in a bit of a bubble. But when you leave the bubble and go home, stuff happens. And I was simply a gifted resource to, again, practice effective, active listening, and to be a safe place for these players to talk about what was really going on in their lives and how to navigate it. And it was a chapter, and I do think life is a series of chapters that we never know exactly how many we're going to get. But that was a chapter that I would never have imagined, and certainly would never regret, because I got to touch a few lives. And the answer to your question, Kurt, is they're ongoing. I'm still. I worked for Gus Bradley and Dan Quinn and other great coaches around the country, with one-off, situations of crisis where you can show up and not ask for anything or want anything from these people, but rather just show up and hold space so that they can make their own informed decision on how to move forward in the healthiest way.
Cool.
Dirk, you got an incredible story in Go Seahawks, right? That was my team growing up. So,
Hawks football fans are the best. I don't care what anybody. It's the loudest place in the NFL, and the fan base is incredibly astute and devoted.
It's just fun. Brings back memories. Makes me think of growing up and all the fun, right?
Yeah, it's a good time for sure.
Well, the work you do is incredible, Dirk, and just your presence, and the way that you present yourself here makes it pretty clear how you present yourself with these women that you work with. Even the relationship that you have with your wife and the way you talk about her and the way that the adoration that you have for these people that you work with and the work that these women are doing says a lot for you. And I appreciate you showing up that way and developing into the guy that you have been.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I know I hear you use the word, to listen, that you're listening to understand and holding that space. And I've heard you say it over and over again. And I don't know if there's a more important concept to capture for any of us when it comes to relationships.
I would agree. I don't want to bash on either one of my parents, but I grew up with a very dysfunctional, like my mother was there to hear what my father wanted next. And it gave me a very skewed perception of the importance of listening. And in recovery, it's been my primary driver, besides my spiritual growth, is to make an art out of active listening, because I think it's a lost art. And I think the generations that have come before us have really botched it up in a profound way, where we hear somebody we love say something, whatever it is, like they're in a bind or in a struggle, and my reaction, the human condition indicates that I'm going to stop Shelley after that first sentence and tell her how to fix it, is an ineffective model for life. And in recovery, I've gotten some awareness around that and some acceptance around that, and I've made it my personal mantra to zip up my lip and listen twice as much as I speak, because we should. And it's really the greatest gift that we can give one another as humans, and that is just to hear and not have to fix or judge or condemn something that's coming out of another person's mouth, but to just listen, and through it gives us the ability to meet people where they are in a much more effective, I think, manner.
I could not agree more. And I think, any relationship that's struggling, I think that's the first step, right? Is to learn how to actively listen, and stop trying to listen to answer questions or to tell them how they're wrong. Because so often we do it and we don't even recognize that that's been a pattern for our entire life. So I love that. So super powerful. Dirk, what's in the future for you?
I don't know. I give it a lot of thought, though. I can tell you that. At 60, and I remember, 60 is horribly old. And now that I'm 60, I feel wonderfully young, meaning, the body doesn't work like it used to, but my mind is full of curiosity. And I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I have no desire to do anything different. I want to manifest and grow Momenta, hopefully to be recognized as the best women's trauma center in the country. And the future will reside in that, and finishing, what the gift of recovery. And that's like, I've got 5 kids, 3 that I helped bring into the world, and 2 that I took on as stepkids, who lost their father to this disease, who was a dear friend of mine and a good man. But he asked me to raise his kids for him. And if I don't do anything other than finish strong as a good dad and a loving husband, that's good enough. But I think I know I love the Rocky Mountains. I love Momenta and helping one family at a time here. And again, just trying to show up and be the best version of myself that I can for my bride and my kids. That'll be a good finish. But I don't have any plans on doing anything other than what I'm doing right here, right now.
Yep, Dirk, I couldn't agree more. I think that that's probably the strongest finish anyone could have in this life. So I think that's pretty profound. I have to ask this because it's just a burning question in my mind. But if you were going to recommend a book for someone to read, what would be that recommendation?
The Gifts of Imperfection.
Oh, I love that one. Brene Brown, she's amazing.
Yeah, I'm a disciple. I absolutely love her and aspire to be more like her. And I think that's a good one. I've got books though. I mean, I give away The Shack. I give away The Alchemist. I like it, stories that make you think and find and define God as you would like. But I firmly believe that we need to have an active relationship with something greater than ourselves, and any book that would draw me closer to that understanding is a book I want to read.
I love it. I love it. Maybe in our next podcast episode, we can dive into a little bit of the spirituality piece and how that's played a role in your life, because I always find that fascinating. I think, some people, everybody looks at it a little differently, and I just love being taught by, people's experiences around spirituality. So in our next
Absolutely.
episode, we'll definitely have some fun with that. Dirk, I just want to really appreciate who you are and what you've brought to the table and what you've shared today in our episode. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley, and thank you, Kurt. This has been fun, and if you want to have me back and talk about spirituality, I'm in.
Fantastic.
Let's do it.
One last thing. I expect people are going to want to connect with you. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Email is D for Dirk. Eldredge is ELDREDGE at Momenta Recovery, one word.com. That's probably the smartest way. I'm hesitant, but I would give out my cell phone. I guess I could give it to you two, and if somebody wants it, I want to be there to pick up the phone.
Oh, perfect. That sounds great. Dirk, thanks so much. It's been great.
Thank you, Shelley, and thanks, Kurt. Have a good day.
All right.
Thanks, Dirk.